Hi guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to have a follow-up video from my most viewed video on the channel at the moment, which is my mauling opponents online using grappling, dominating using side control and crucifix. So that was a very specific video, and it basically was me speaking over and giving you a variety of gameplay clips on me using the side control and of course crucifix, and how I look to control my opponents using them. This video is a follow-up video on that. Obviously in the latest season, as you can see, I'm in a Division 12 in the first gameplay clip here, and obviously throughout the gameplays I will rank up and stuff. But yeah, you're going to have a wide variety of gameplay clips in with a lot of grapple dominant fighters. There's going to be some rage quits, there's going to be some early finishes, and then there's also going to be some slightly longer ones, and I've tried to use some of the best grapplers in the division I'm using. So for instance, right now, as you can see, I'm using Johnny Bones Jones, who is probably the best wrestler in the division in my opinion to grapple with, just because of all the tools he has in his arsenal. And a common thing that you'll notice is when you do start implementing like wrestling online, you will see that a lot of your opponents just give up. As you can see, I denied the 3 transitions there, shoots straight for the Cormier, which transitions into an armbar. My opponent had no stamina, so instantly decides to quit. Here we're using Islam Makhachev, who is my favourite grappler to use in the lightweight division. Yes, obviously, of course, you've got Habib, but there is just something about Islam. I really do like using him, and plus I waited so long for him to be actually implemented into the game that it feels nice to finally be able to just maul people with him. And of course, he's got more of a submission-heavy approach than Habib. Obviously, Habib towards the later end of his career did start throwing in a lot of submissions, of course, but Islam throughout has showcased that he cares more about submission over ground and pound. So that's exactly how I like to fight. As you can see, my opponent's having a real difficult time here, just trying to transition out. We're denying the transitions constantly, and as soon as I start denying 1 or 2 transitions and I've got the momentum, I always shoot for a submission. And obviously I'm only going to grapple with elite grapplers or fighters that is their primary thing to do, because it makes the most sense to that playstyle. And I want to quickly talk about how I go for my submission selection. So whenever I'm in side control or in a position where my opponent is just can't get out, I've got the momentum on me, I've denied 1 or 2 transitions, and I can see that my opponent's stamina's low. If the clock is above anywhere, let's say I've got more than 50 seconds left on the clock, I'll go for it. It tends to be more than a minute, if I'm honest with you, just because sometimes 50 seconds isn't enough to finish the submission. But that's when I'll shoot for submission. If my opponent's weak and I've got less than a minute left, I'll look to ground and pound instead, because the likelihood is I'm not going to get that submission finish. And this is what this round here using Luke Rockhold is going to showcase to you. So as you can see, I'm coming up against the Dominic Reyes. I'm not sure if it showed the stats for the first round or if I just started from the second, but in the first round it was fairly even. I think I got 2 leg health stuns and my opponent got a rock, because obviously Luke Rockhold has terrible chin health, so I opted to go straight for the grappling. And that's one thing that's very underrated when using Luke Rockhold, is his ability to grapple. Phenomenal grappler. I mean, his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu, it just is off the charts. And as you can see, that's exactly what I'm implementing here. I'm throwing in a good use of ground and pound, and if he had a higher ground and pound, I probably would have looked to get my opponent out of it. As you can see that throughout the rest of this round, I absolutely dominate my opponent. Like, my opponent cannot get up. And as you can see, I'm trying to mix up my transitions. I don't usually go to top mount, but I decided to go for it there. And the only reason I don't really go for top mount too much, and I'd advise a lot of you not to, is just because when you do get to top mount, sometimes it is hard to deny the transition from your opponent going to half guard. And certain fighters, depending on their reversals and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling, I think reversals, they have the full guard transition straight from there. So it's quite an easy way to flip you over. So that's something I'm cautious of. But that's why I like going into side control, because from side control, if I'm coming up against someone that has good Jiu-Jitsu or good wrestling maneuvers, from side control they can either get up or get to full guard, and I'm not too worried about either of those options. They're quite easy to deny. Whereas if I'm on top mount and they flip me into full guard, then now they're in the more dominant position, and I am confident off my back. It's just obviously, of course, I'm way more confident when I'm on top of my opponent, it works better for me in terms of grappling. And as you can see here, my opponent gets to sprawl, and if he used this position correctly, he could really use it to anti-grapple. And as you can see here, we lock in a submission with a minute to go, and this is normally the marker in which I give to get submissions, but as you can see, my opponent's showing good sign of submission defense here, mixing up where he's going. And even though Luke Rockhold has extremely good submissions, I was struggling to really lock this one in. And as you can see, the likelihood is my opponent is going to get out, but we've transitioned it to a stage where when my opponent does get out, I will be on top of him. So it was a good submission attempt. If perhaps I'd done a better job, I would have been able to get my opponent out of there. As you see, we get up here, go for the ground and pound, and it's just an extremely dominant round. And this is what the fight should look like when you are wanting to initiate these grappling exchanges. Your opponent shouldn't even have any sort of chance, and that's what I try to showcase to you guys here. And again, this is all ranked matches. This is across multiple divisions, so I'm not just using one fighter who I'm really good with. I am grappling with obviously elite grapplers, but it's across a wide variety of divisions and across a wide variety of opponents. So as you can see, beginning the third, take my opponent down, and now I know that my opponent's got decent submission defense, so I've got to be very selective with my strikes. My submission attempt, sorry, does a good job here of getting up, and I'm going to look to do the same thing here. So as you can see, throwing some strikes, keeping my opponent towards the fence because it's easy to get takedowns that way. Shoot for a takedown, get my opponent's back. Beautiful suplex here. And again, this is just extremely demoralising to come up against. Deny 2 here, deny the third transition, and this is just things I've picked up on. Again, I throw one strike, see how my opponent reacts. Get my opponent here, and he rolls, and then we get straight into back sitting. And it's just very fluid, the transitions here. We get the deny there, get the deny here again because he went the same way, and of course I could go for the rear naked choke, but that submission is just so broken. I don't even like using it. As you can see here, I opted in for the armbar instead, purely just because of the fact that I feel bad when I use that rear naked choke. I know I shouldn't, my opponents use it on me all the time, but yeah, I don't know, it just doesn't, there's something about that submission that it's just a bit too broken in my opinion. And then here we're using Vittori, who I'd say he's a fairly good grappler, you know, especially in the middleweight division. I think there are better grapplers, but just because of how he is and how he grapples, and obviously how he looked to fight against Izzy, which was of course not his best fight, either of them really. And I was coming up against a Rob Whittaker here, who's, you know, the best fighter on the game, without a shadow of a doubt. Him and Petr Yan, they feel the exact same. They're just levels above everyone else. But I thought, let me just wrestle this Robert Whittaker to death. As you can see, my opponent's stamina right now, he's in a terrible position. And one thing you will find is people will start flicking to the right constantly, and they just do it over and over and over again to stop you from throwing elbows. And they just do it to waste time. And then as you can see, we end up reversing him straight back into this position. And this is exactly where you don't want to be. And he's just getting elbows and elbows to the face. And my opponent's getting increasingly frustrated. As you can see, he keeps trying to transition, and he's walking. What he's doing is going towards the fence to then try to flip me over. And if that don't work, he'll try to get into just get into full guard and then cage walk up. And I'm very aware of this, as you can see. And he keeps going for the same transitions. He's just trying to survive. He's got 2 minutes and like 30 seconds on the clock. And he thinks if he just keeps flicking, he'll eventually get out. So the counter to this is to get my opponent to crucifix. And one thing to note is that if you watch my gameplay a lot, is that I won't opt for crucifix straight away, because I feel like if I have the momentum and I go into crucifix, sometimes it eliminates that momentum. And of course, if you go into crucifix and they get out straight away, they just feel like it's going to be an easier time on the ground. So I'm really selective how I do it. And then as you can see, we end up finishing my opponent when I do decide to go to crucifix. So whenever I go to crucifix, it's because I am feeling really confident, and I feel like although I've got the momentum, I can really look for a finish, and that's exactly what happened there. And now in this gameplay clip here, we're using Glover Teixeira, and what a fighter he is. I mean, he's one of my favourite fighters, and grappling with him is just so fun, because obviously, like I said, I prefer submissions. Obviously this gameplay here might not be the most realistic because he's fighting against his training partner Chuck Liddell, and obviously with Chuck, he's just got extremely good hands, very good anti-wrestler, So you've got to be careful when it stays on the feet, because he's just so powerful. So obviously I took my opponent down, which is the right thing to do when you're coming up against Chuck Liddell. And at the moment I'm just denying these transitions and figuring out where my opponent is trying to go. And yeah, with Glover Teixeira, the submissions you can pull off, especially once you gas out your opponents, you can tap them out with relative ease, to be honest with you. As you can see, my opponent keeps getting up and we're just dragging him straight back. Push him to the cage here, drag him down and get straight into side control, which is one of my favourite things to do. And often or not, when you get your opponent here, it's very, very hard for them to get out, especially once they get gassed, and it's just demoralising. Obviously, when you're coming up against an opponent who you know is just going to look to grapple you, is one thing, okay, because you can expect it, like, alright, he's just going to take me down, and I've just got to work to get to my feet. But after one round of just getting absolutely brutalised and nothing you're doing to work him, and then when it does go on the feet, you just get dragged straight back down. It's incredibly demoralising, and that's why I really opt for this playstyle, because it's just clean. You know, you're just going to get your opponents down, and you can always fluke a win on the feet, no matter how good or bad you are. For instance, so if you're a very high level player and you're fighting someone that's, you know, not the best player, but they can get a fluke knockout on you, it's very hard really to get a fluke submission unless you've genuinely made a massive mistake, unless you've really gashed yourself out and they're in an advantageous position. It's a lot harder to lose on the ground through stuff that's out of your control. So that's why I opt for this approach. And yeah, as you can see, now we're using Charles Oliveira, who had an incredible performance against Dustin Poirier. And Oliveira, of course, we know how good he is on the ground, we know how good his submissions are. And as you can see, I'm just softening up my opponent here, and I work a lot in the half guard, and of course in side control, because that's where I feel the most confident. But from half guard I put in a lot of work, so I'll be throwing a lot of punches, throwing a lot of fakes, denying a lot of transitions, and it's all with the mindset of tire out my opponent, and then when I do get into side control, really look to hurt him. So here I'm waiting till when my opponent transitions, we get the deny here, throwing some elbows, mixing it up, and I'm waiting for my opponent to move. And there I'm also timing my strikes so that I'm not throwing it in a rhythm, so then my opponent can't just throw me off. We go for the bulldog choke here, and I don't know if I follow through this one. Yeah, I think I realised that I'm definitely not going to get it, so I cancel it, and then I'm waiting to see what my opponent's going to try and do instead. And one thing when you grapple is you've got to be incredibly patient, because if I go from one bad transition, he reverses me, all the hard work I've done to get to that position is just wasted. So as you can see, I'm being patient here, flatten out my opponent, we wind up here, and then I go for the submission attempt, because look at my opponent's stamina, is just not in a great position. And when you're coming up against someone with elite level submissions like Charles Oliveira, and your stamina isn't in the best position, it's going to be very easy to get the finish. So as you can see, we're working away here at my opponent, and obviously Dustin's got good submission defense, and yeah, you can see my opponent's having a hard time getting out, and it's around about this point here that my opponent sort of gives up, because he knows that he's not going to get out. And coming into the next gameplay here, we're using Daniel Cormier, who I love to grapple with. DC, one of my favourites to grapple with for sure. And we're coming up against Jan, the former champion. Again, get the takedown, straight into side control. My opponent does a good job getting me into full guard, but again, I'm working away, being patient, waiting to see where my opponent goes. Whenever your opponent does that thing where they like rotate to go to full guard, they're either instantly gonna look to flip you into half guard, or just get up. So as soon as they do that, where they just get themselves back into full guard, it's just to build momentum. So if you posture up straight away, it sort of takes that momentum out the window, and you end up in a good position. They have lower stamina, and you can transition easier. So that's just the tip there. That's what I always look to do. We get the denial here, and it's all about momentum. Grappling 99% of the time is to do with momentum. You've really just got to watch out for these transitions, and people always ask me like, oh, how do you get the deniers? And most of the time it's just me thinking, okay, like if I was on the bottom, where would I want to go? So when I get into side control, my opponent's always going to look to go to sprawl, because that's where he feels like it's going to be the safest. So I always pre-deny sprawl, and after I pre-deny sprawl, it's just a battle of, okay, is my opponent then going to try get me down to half guard, sprawl again? But if he goes half guard, he's going to go up, or is he going to go down? and it's just making those small decisions. The more fights you have, the more you practice, the more you pick up on little tendencies. For instance, my opponent here that's using Ngannou, normally people throw twice with the left hand and then try transition straight away to sprawl. And you'll find that a lot of high level players do it. As you can see now, I can't see my opponent's stamina because we've ranked up enough in the divisions. And it's just little habits like that that even top level players have. And once you pick up on it, it's very easy to start getting wins through just dominating people here, because no matter how good your opponent is everywhere else, there is an infinite number of ways to take your opponent down. And in this UFC more than ever, there's such a wide variety. If you can't take them down for a single leg, a double leg, a power double, you can trip them in the clinch, you can then work on the cage, you can do a turning back sitting cage. Like, there's just so many ways of getting them down. So what I'm trying to say is, if you get really good at one portion of the game, like here, dominating on the ground with side control, then you'll find it really easy. But that's going to be the video for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. It did take quite a while to make. As you see, there's a lot of different gameplay, and I still have more that I could upload, so I hope you enjoy this sort of part 2 of the video. And yeah, thank you for all the support. Thank you for 123 subscribers. Content suggestions, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.